the Wildlife Observer Network.
Hello, this is Tony from the Urban Wildlife Podcast. I have an interview with Joanna and Byron Chin about their work with urban nesting Heermann's gulls in Seaside, California. This interview got a little off to a weird start because I ill-advised decided to comment about outside cats on a neighborhood message board on Facebook, which got me blown up by all the cat fanatics. And I didn't realize that even if I shut off Facebook on my computer would still ding every time I got an announcement. So you'll hear some dings, although I think I effectively silenced that conversation. But I got a couple other dings. So this is a new thing that I'm learning, is to how to silence Facebook when I conduct an interview via Skype recording on my Zoom recorder. And speaking of Zoom recorder, that Zoom recorder was partially purchased by our Patreon supporters. So we do have Patreon. We do have, we are the Urban Wildlife Podcast on Facebook and Urban Wildlife Cast on Twitter and all the other social medias. So we hope that you will rate us highly, that you'll like our videos. Oh, I just announced something by accident. So we are also going to be on YouTube soon. So whether or not this is released before or after our YouTube channel, we're going to have a YouTube channel, but it's going to be called the Wildlife Observation Network. So keep your eyes peeled and ears pierced for that. So without further ado, here is Joanna and Byron Chin. Welcome to the Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Thank you.
I would like you to introduce yourselves and start by telling me about your project. Now, true confession, the Gull that you do such great work with, I can't recall. I've seen a bunch of them out west, but I can't recall if I've ever heard someone pronounce the name out loud, like definitively. So I'm not sure if it's Heermann's or Hermann's Gull. So I would love to. I want to hear you say it first before I go halfway through the interview saying it incorrectly.
All right. It is Heermann's Gull.
Often mispronounced as Hermann's Gull or misspelled as Hermann's Gull.
So this gull, until you're in Oceanside, where you live in like the Seaside. So until this population was discovered breeding in Seaside, there was no known population in the United States, only in Mexico. Is that correct?
Only in Mexico.
So this gull breeds in Mexico, but it wanders up the coast. And so who found the population? Where were they nesting, and how did you get involved?
Sure. So the original nesting population was found by a birder in Monterey named Don Roberson. And he originally found the gulls in 1999 when he was at Roberts Lake in Seaside and was looking on these artificial islands that the city had put in place. And I can get a little more into the history and why they did that. And there was an island near the sort of, what would that be, southwestern end of the lake, where all the vegetation was dying off, and he spotted 3 Heermann's gulls nests with chicks. And this had never been described before, never been noticed before. He wrote it up. He actually wrote a book on the birds of Monterey. And if you look up Heermann's Gull, he's got a picture of one of the nests with a near fledgling chick from 1999. And he kept an eye on this island. And over the course of the next few years, they had sort of middling success. They got disrupted by, I think, Canada geese a couple of years. And eventually that man-made island sank into the lake. It was supposed to have been held together by tree roots. And all the trees and vegetation died, and so the sandy soil just sort of washed away. And after that, no one was really tracking them to see what happened to them.
And so they were nesting on McDonald's, is that true?
They were. So.
And that was before or after the lake?
That was long after the lake. So the islands in the lake disintegrated in 2009,
About,
was it?
well, 2007 or so. They
2007.
were
Okay.
largely gone by the
Yeah.
mid 2000s.
Yeah. And the birds were then spotted, I want to say in what was it,
They,
2012, 2013. This was all before we hit the scene. Um, and they were nesting atop a warehouse that's actually owned by Reggie Jackson, Mr. October, the famous baseball player. He keeps his classic cars there. And they nested there successfully for several years until he figured out that there were seagulls on his roof. And in 2016, put a net up over active nests with eggs.
2017.
2017?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, 2017, which of course is totally illegal, but no one really did anything. And Fish and Wildlife were notified, but no one
took any action.
no one took any action. They didn't go out and collect evidence, and it all just sort of, yeah.
And then once it was there, it can it's in place, and it can't do much in the subsequent years. So they tried again briefly. At least they tried to stake out territories on that building in 2018, and then they moved on. And right around when we were watching, that was right around when we got involved, and we
got involved in
2018.
Yes, 2018.
And we are just, and I guess we might as well introduce ourselves too. We are not scientists. We are scientists, but we are not ornithologists.
Not ornithologists.
In my day job, I am actually a lawyer, and Joanna is a pediatrician, and we are birders. And we would often take trips. We actually live about, I guess, an hour and a half north of Seaside. We were in the East Bay of San Francisco, and we took trips regularly down to Monterey. And one day we heard a rumor that there might be Heermann's gulls nesting around, and so we started walking around the city to see if we could find them. And that's how we happened upon them.
Yep. And as to the rooftop nesting, we initially discovered them largely with the use of Byron's drone, which we use very carefully, of course, around nesting birds. And he can get into that more. Of course, our daughter just woke up. She doesn't nap well. I hope we can get her settled. But we found them nesting on the McDonald's, I want to say about a month or so before tragedy struck. And from the looks of things, the birds had been nesting on top of the McDonald's for a while. It was one of these roofs with a sunken area with the kind of walls around it, so you couldn't see what they were doing from the ground. But we flew the drone up one day nice and high, and you could see just so much bird poop. I mean, this was not the result of a single year's worth of nesting. I think they've probably been up there for some time and no one had noticed. But then on July 5th? I must say, no, it was June 5th of 2018. A drunk driver slammed into the side of the McDonald's building at 5 a.m. and hit the gas and electrical connections on the building. And that was the end of that. The McDonald's went up in flames. Everyone in the cars or the car in the McDonald's miraculously survived, but of course the nests were all toast. And all the adult gulls survived, but they didn't re-nest again that year.
And so you then, at what point did you get the idea to restart to put in the artificial nest platforms or the floating platforms in the lake?
Yeah, it was around that time we realized that the number of rooftop nesting sites that were available to them had become few enough that we were like, well, what's going to happen? You know, they don't really have any protections on rooftops. You know, we'd already had the warehouse rooftop netted off by Reggie Jackson. They had also tried to nest on the adjacent rooftop that belongs to a building called Spas by the Bay. The owner there was lovely. He loved the gulls. They nested on his roof for a few years, and he thought they were cool. But it's a low enough roof that a predator was able to climb up, we think probably a raccoon, and it killed the chicks in 2018 as well. So we were like, geez, they're running out of space here. And we'd love to get an island back in the lake. And the only thing that made any sense was to make a floating island, because obviously an island made of fill, if you tried to put it back in, it would meet the same fate. It would just erode away. And if you planted it, the gulls won't like it because they don't want vegetated nesting grounds. They want bare, kind of sandy, gravelly soil.
That is, I think it's just like so remarkable that how proactive you are with this. It's such a unique situation, and to be able to come up with this inventive solution, I just think, when I saw you post about this, I was just like, this is so cool. And I mean, I'm just a big fan of what you're doing. So what are you seeing in terms of results? And is this the first year that you, with the artificial platforms, how'd the nesting go?
So we haven't had it out for a nesting season yet. We met with a few bureaucratic delays with the city. Overall, the city of Seaside has been absolutely remarkable with this project. They have been so helpful. They're really into it too. And when we started with literally a box of moldy old documents, like they'd been in storage and had gotten water damage, because I wanted to understand what had happened even before we knew about the gulls nesting, and before 1999, like, had they been there longer? And I actually found evidence that they had been there long. They did biological surveys after putting in the nesting islands, and from 1990 through 1994, the 5-year period that they did the surveys, they noted Heermann's gulls in breeding plumage in like May and June every single year. They shouldn't be there in May and June. They should be in Mexico. So it makes me wonder, has this colony been clandestinely breeding in the area for even longer than we know about? So anyway, we got the island out in late April of this year, I'm sorry. God, time flies. And it was too late for them to nest on it because they start prospecting in like February, March, typically build their nests in like April, lay their eggs in late April to early May, with hatching around the beginning of June. So we were out too late for them this year, which has been nice because we've been able to kind of troubleshoot. We have a trail camera to take pictures, and we wanted to see, what's going on out there. We wanted to prototype some chick hides and kind of some structure, because they tend to like to build their nests in corners and kind of sheltered spaces. And we wanted to see how everything held up in this kind of hostile, brackish coastal environment. But this coming year is going to be the first one where we hope to get gulls nesting. So we're crossing our fingers.
That is really cool. How much time are you of your free time? I know you have a child now, but how often are you out there? What's the scope of the volunteer situation?
So we have partnered with Monterey Audubon. They have been amazing, fantastically supportive, both financially and also helping out with volunteer time, with kind of getting the word out, with sort of giving us some legit support here, so we're not just a couple of randos putting things in the lake, So we've had folks from Monterey Audubon come. There's a group called Sustainable Seaside that we gave a talk to, and they came out in force to help us with the initial launch of the island, and also for some kind of maintenance visits along the way. We've had people who found us through our Facebook and Instagram who have come out to give us a hand. The community response has really been phenomenal. And as to how much time we've spent, I don't even think I can count the hours. It's been a lot. But it is a labor of love.
Now, are other species using these platforms as well?
So with our trail camera, we have been monitoring what's been going on, and we've gotten a lot of visitors. We've had a great blue heron who like to hang out in the evenings. We've had a green heron visit. We've had a snowy egret, a black phoebe that likes to land on the trail camera and go chase bugs from there. We have had a single Canada goose, which we don't want to encourage the Canada geese because they were impediments to the Heermann's gulls nesting in the past. So we do have a fence around it, but we had one intrepid individual who flew onto it, looked around, didn't find anything to its liking, and left again. And lately, we have had a family of western gulls who nested on the Hampton Inn that's across the street from the lake. They hatched one chick this year, and they and their fledged chick like to come and the adults feed the chick on the island. Now, this is all cute and fun to watch, but we're really hopeful that when it comes to nesting season, they don't decide that the island looks better than their old nesting site. Because if we get a western gull, they're very aggressive in defending their territory, and they will likely try to chase off any Heermann's gulls. So we're going to have to keep a real close eye on that situation. Fortunately, they're not roosting on the island overnight, so we think they're just using it as a convenient feeding spot for their giant baby.
So let's, we should have probably done this earlier. Let's talk about Heermann's gulls in general. Can you walk us through a brief description of the bird, where they normally breed, any notes on their feeding ecology or whatnot?
Sure. So the Heermann's gull is kind of a smallish to medium-sized gull. They are they're really beautiful. They have kind of dark gray bodies, white heads and breeding plumage with red beaks and black legs. They're pretty unmistakable. During the off season, their heads go from bright white to kind of gray speckled. They nest largely in small islands off the coast of Mexico. One island in particular is in the Gulf of California. It's called Isla Raza, and it is this tiny, less than a quarter of a square mile, flat island that about 95% of the Heermann's gulls population in the world breeds on. That's also the main site for the elegant tern. A lot of them breed there as well. And then there's small populations of the gull on other small islands in the area. And they're weird in that they do kind of a reverse migration. They fly south for the spring and summer to breed. And in the winter season, they head back north, as far north as southern British Columbia. So you see them all along the west coast in the off season.
And is there any indication of why they've come north? Climate change? Is it anything besides speculation? Is there any? This is the only known colony, but do you suspect that they're in other areas?
That is a very good question. So, as far as why they've come north, climate change is definitely a consideration. In the last several years, the Heermann's gulls have had a number of years where they've had almost total breeding failure. It's been due to a lack of food. Every time there's a strong El Nino event or the blob, that big massive warm water in the Pacific, it drives the forage fish that the gulls feed on either into deeper, cooler waters or into cooler waters elsewhere. So the gulls show up, on most of them on Raza. They look around, there's no food. They don't nest. They come back up early. So if you see Heermann's gulls cruising up the coast in, June or July, it's a real bad sign. And I want to say they've had almost total breeding failure for something like 4 out of the last 6 years. So it's been a rough road for them. And as to other colonies, we don't know of any. I have looked on eBird to see where might have a similar distribution pattern like Seaside did, because if you looked at Seaside's and kind of the Monterey eBird reports, you would see Heermann's gulls showing up when there shouldn't have been Heermann's gulls. And La Jolla down in San Diego has a similar eBird profile for the Heermann's gull. Now, I live way too far away to go check that out, but is it possible that there could be Heermann's gull breeding on rooftops in La Jolla? Sure. They're pretty stealthy when they're breeding.
Do you know do they breed on man-made structures in Mexico? Or are they only on natural substrate?
As far as we know, they are only on natural substrate. We do not have any knowledge of any other urban Heermann's gulls colonies.
Are there roof nesting gulls of other species in your area?
Absolutely, the western gulls.
So what's your plan moving forward? Are you going to expand your operations? Do you want to put them in other areas in town or in neighboring cities, or just keep this one going? I mean, which is fine. I'm just curious if you have any.
Sure. So our first goal is obviously to attract the gulls. We're trying to make as nice a habitat for them as we possibly can based on what they've liked in the past. Once we attract them to our island, we've got decoys out. We're going to put a sound system out and start playing their calls, hopefully by like late January, early February, to see if we can't get their attention, see if we can't get them on the island. We wouldn't expect them to be scouting out at all because the Heermann's gulls, unlike the westerns, pay no attention to their breeding grounds in the off season. The western gulls will kind of show up, they'll hang around, they'll hold the territory year round, but the Heermanns, once they're done, once those chicks fledge, they're out until next season. They do not come back. So we won't know until next, late winter, early spring, if they're going to come back or come at all. And as for if we are successful and if we get a lot of gulls on the island, it is a modular design so that more space can be added to it. So we would probably look to expand the current island because it's a little tough to figure out where other appropriate sites might be, because it would have to be somewhere that was predator proof, and that people would want gulls, and not everyone is charitable toward gulls, unfortunately.
Or the smell.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. They smell a little like a seabird colony,
I can imagine. Is there indications that the Heermann's gull population overall is down? Due to the reasons that might want them to relocate their colonies or to look for colonies closer to where their food sources has moved, is the population in Mexico down? Do you know?
That is also a good question. We have been in touch with Enriqueta Velarde, who is a professor at the University of Veracruz in Mexico. She is the preeminent researcher of Heermann's gulls and elegant tern. She spends every breeding season on Raza to keep an eye on them. So far as we know, the overall population is relatively stable. But if this trend of poor breeding continues year after year after year, they will obviously decline.
Yeah, I mean, that's just. I saw a great lecture the other night about problems birds face in winter, and the one of the problems with climate change is birds are now getting out of sync with their food sources, and we were talking about how when birds migrate back to their traditional breeding colonies in the North Atlantic, the young fish that have spawned are now farther north, and they can't. And so the colonies are no longer within, a few
foraging
hours
distance.
foraging distance. That's what I was struggling for.
Yeah.
And it's just very tragic. So it sounds like, but it's interesting. The West Coast compared to the East Coast, you have colder water farther south, but yet warmer temperatures. It's milder on the West Coast, but the water's colder. You don't have as severe winters. It's so different from what we deal with the East Coast. We don't have we have terns and skimmers out here, but we don't have alcids and gannets and whatnot are much farther north. So it's interesting that you have these birds out east. We just think as northern species breeding all the way down into Baja, Mexico. So it's really And it's just fascinating and interesting how the currents and everything work.
It is.
And then you just put a little bit of a monkey wrench in that, and everything goes haywire.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the Heermann's gulls in Seaside is on the Monterey Peninsula, like, food is not an issue. The bay is full of food for them. And so even just talking with Dr. Velarde, there are differences in their nesting successes. So apparently on Raza, 3 chick nests are very uncommon. Like, they may lay 3 eggs, but not all 3 chicks are going to survive because there's not enough food. But in the Seaside colony, 3 chick nests are kind of like about 50% of them, and they have 2 chick and 1 chick are the rest. And they usually fledge all 3 chicks, and they're fat. Food is not the issue. So they're dealing with an entirely different set of circumstances compared to their the main colony.
So I started this conversation admitting with you, and I didn't record this, but we started with little technical difficulties and also mental difficulties, because we started this where I had ill-advised started a cat argument on Facebook, and
Yes.
which led me to be getting all these notifications of all these cat fanatics blowing me up on Facebook. And so A, that got me distracted, and B, I had to figure out how to silence the alerts, which I think I may have only done for one conversation, but another conversation I got alert for.
Well,
but regardless,
no worries.
I forget.
Byron bailed because the kid woke up, so,
I forget whether or not I did a proper introduction and got your names. Did I do that? And if not, let's
No.
do that. Okay, please tell me
That did not happen.
your names. So,
So,
for everybody, introduce yourselves. And
Of course. I'm Joanna Chin.
And I'm Byron Chin.
great. So I might just actually in post introduce you, but I just want to make sure I have that just in case. I'm sorry.
Of course.
I feel like it's funny. We've been doing this for a while, but I don't. It's only been recently that we kind of made an informal studio where we actually have before we would record. We had a Skype recorder on the computer, and then we would also have we would use Google Voice. But now we actually have it where I actually plug things directly into a multi-track recorder from my computer, and so it never occurred to me that I'd be dealing with Facebook notifications from. Well, the funny thing is when I get in these arguments, I just post links to episodes that we've covered with cats, because we literally we had a 2-part episode where we go through all the literature on both sides, and then recently there's one with Travis. I forget his last name. He lives out in Los Angeles, who's currently suing City of Los Angeles about their cat.
We heard that episode.
You should listen to it driving down to Seaside.
Oh, that's awesome.
We are firmly in your corner. No outdoor. We have a cat. We love our cat. No outdoor cats, and where they are feral, eradicate.
Yeah, that's my policy. I have a cat. I took my cat from the outside, and I found it in my park, and it's. I mean, I love this cat. Like, I can't believe how I feel about this animal. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
I used to be a dog person, but then I had some girlfriends with cats, and I kind of got used to being around cats, and then I was like, well, maybe I'll get my own cat, and then. When my wife and I moved in together, her cat died 2 weeks before we moved in together. My cat died 2 weeks after, and then we went catless for a little while. We took a cat in from the outside. That our friends were like, "Oh, this is a gorgeous tortoiseshell outside all day, every day. Take it." We took it to get fixed. It was already fixed and chipped, and they wouldn't give the cat back to me. They were like, I was like, but it violated the rules of your adoption. Like, the same place we took it to was one who chipped it, and it's against the rules to let a cat back outside, and yet they made us give it back. And I said, well, tell them that I know where this cat hangs out, and if it comes back out again, they're never gonna get it back. And and I guess they keep it aside now. But luckily, that cat was okay. The cat I got is like a living teddy bear. I just pick him up and carry him around the house all day. He's the sweetest cat in the world, and he was chipped too. But it turns out that his owner died, so I assume whoever inherited him just dumped him. So it's funny. People think we're cat haters because but it's just pragmatism. But we've covered this
Yep.
quite enough. It's funny. I've been in meetings with my bird club where I'm sitting at a table with all these incredible ornithologists, and we all agree about outside cats and that they should be euthanized. Like, it's just pragmatic, and yet we all own cats. So,
Yes.
is there, in my distraction and my technical difficulties, is there any aspect of your work that I missed that we definitely got to cover before we wrap this up?
I think it would be real nice if Byron could talk a little bit about the use of his drone to find the Heermann's gulls on the rooftops, because without it, we would never have known about the McDonald's. We would never have known about the Holiday Inn. Like, there are so many sites that are really sheltered from view from the ground. You would never know, because they're kind of quiet and keep to themselves. And unless you sit there for half an hour and watch for the feeding flights to go in, you'd never know they were nesting.
And I guess an interesting aspect of it is most of the press you see about drones and birds is negative.
Mm-hmm.
It's about people flying drones too close to nesting sites, which is a serious issue. Actually, in Monterey Bay, they are having a real problem with people flying too close to black oyster catchers who will chase after the drone and often abandon their nests. But this is they have tremendous scientific value when they're used properly. And I actually only became a drone pilot last year because of this project. And this all started when we were standing by the McDonald's, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to see what is actually going on that roof? And so I bought a drone, managed not to crash it, and it was a Mavic camera drone. And I also think, part of it is also you really have to understand seabird behavior to actually fly safely around seabirds. But since then, I've gotten my commercial drone certification, and I would say we've done the vast majority of our nest counting has been by drone. It's by flying a small and quiet camera drone relatively high above and watching the gulls at all times to make sure they're not being bothered or harassed by it. But
I always act as a spotter. You got to know your species, because they'll tell you they're agitated before they start charging at your drone.
And Western gulls seem to hate drones a lot more than Heermann's gulls. I've never had a Heermann's gull chase a drone. Granted, I'm flying about 125 or more feet above them, but only Western gulls will chase after it, and then you will see an angry bird circling up and trying to get at your drone. And of course, if you ascend, you can outclimb it. So it's been an incredibly valuable tool, and we actually, it turns out a lot of researchers are using them for very, very varied purposes. And we talked to a bunch of them at the Pacific Seabird Conference. So I think it's been one of our most vital tools in discovering where they are and what they're doing, especially their nesting nets. They haven't had that purposes.
And I also got to give a shout out to the Pacific Seabird Group. They are a group of seabird researchers who, even though we are not seabird researchers, they have really embraced us and have given us so much help and support as far as how to utilize social attraction and just general networking and kind of figuring out how we're going to bring this forward. They've been amazing.
Now with the drone, we have a Byron. You are a lawyer.
Yes.
So I know that you're gonna have done everything legally to make sure to fly the drone. Can you walk me through that? What you had to go through to be sure that is there permits? Is there Fish and Wildlife Service involved? Could you explain that?
So there are two laws, and the drone regulations are. And I had to do the lawyer caveat that this is my opinion, not legal advice, but the drone regulations are ever changing, and they're still trying to figure out how to, who controls the airspace and who regulates it. And so far, the FAA has said, that they control anything that's basically above once your feet are not touching the ground. And so there are two levels of drone levels of certification for drone pilots, and currently most people, if you buy a drone and go out and fly, you're supposed to fly under the hobbyist rules. And a big gray area is whether, I mean, if you're flying to like take real estate photos or do something where you're making money, that the FAA wants you to have a commercial drone pilot license, which that's actually what I have, and that requires a bunch of studying, learning how to read aeronautical charts and understanding basically all the many limitations, and also how to get air traffic control tickets, and so on and so forth. And the question is whether wildlife conservation needs to be flown under a commercial license. It's not a Part 107 license, or you can get a waiver otherwise. So, erring on the side of caution, I initially flew as a hobbyist and just happened to see some Heermann's gulls in my flights, and then about a couple of months in, I went and got certified. The exam good for a couple of years, and yeah, so that is that's I guess at a high level what goes into what you have to do to fly legitimately with it as a wildlife research pilot.
Can you walk us through some best practices for anybody who wants to use drones for wildlife monitoring? Can you give us some, tips for how to do the observations without disturbing the birds and whatnot?
So what's really helpful is we always fly as a team, and I always have visual spotter, which is Joanna with her binoculars, and a lot of that, I think, one of the most important skills to have as a wildlife research drone pilot is an understanding of bird behavior, and and also knowing how different species react, because you can see that often gives, by having someone keeping eyes on the birds, you often get warning cues long before they attack you. And that's, I mean, the worst case scenario, which I've never had, and everyone should avoid, is having a bird versus drone collision, because you're having a bunch of really sharp propeller blades with lots of kinetic energy and an angry bird. And to avoid getting there, we usually fly. The model of drone actually makes a very big difference. I fly a Mavic 2 Pro, which is a small folding drone with a fairly large camera on it. But I've also tried out much larger drones as well. I was hoping to slap a big zoom lens on it and and get some closer shots of the gulls. But as it turns out, the bigger drone is so loud and so conspicuous, they see it the moment it takes off, no matter how far away it is. And so I think ultimately the goal is to be as quiet and inconspicuous as possible. There's been some interesting research that the more a drone looks like a bird, the more likely the birds are going to be pissed off by it and attack it. So actually quadcopters and hexacopters look absolutely nothing like a bird, and they're less likely to be bothered by it. And actually, and as far as the gulls go, we found that they are actually pretty tolerant of drones most of the year, except during the nesting season, as you would expect. They're much more vigilant and much more likely to try to chase something out of the habitat. So it's a very useful research tool, but it has to be utilized very carefully.
So in Philly, we have a bunch of peregrines that nest on buildings. Mm-hmm. And near where I live in the city, there's a church that overlooks the river, and on a steeple, peregrines nest there, and it's actually great. We actually there's a pizza place, so we can look directly up at the peregrines, and friends of mine get together every year and do that, and I do a program where I work for Parks and Rec. We have a rec center that you can look straight across. This is a great thing, and so we're really attached to these peregrines, and one of them got killed this year.
Oh no.
And it was after the breeding season, luckily. It made the papers and everything, and people are thinking that it died because it had an interaction with a drone. So it got me wondering if birds are there different drones. Let me try to articulate this. if a bird is does attack a drone,
Yeah.
are the propellers a danger to the bird, or are there models of drones where that's not an issue?
So I would say every single present model of drone has exposed propellers, or any model that you can fly outdoors safely has exposed propellers, and therefore is some degree of risk to a bird. I would say the big ones are probably the most dangerous because the blades are bigger and there's simply more kinetic energy, and the very large ones have killed people when they crash into them because they're so large and powerful. I did, when I was initially researching drones, and my first concern was bird safety, and I was hoping to get something that had fully shrouded and protected blades. And my first drone, which was a Mavic Pro, you could actually get this thing called the propeller cages, which were actually bolt-on cages for your propellers. The problem with that is that it is horrendously loud, so the birds notice it. It cuts the drone speed in half, so you can't actually escape from an attacking bird. And it acts as a giant sail, so especially in windy pelagic environments, that significantly increases the risk of you having your drone blown out to sea without being able to recover it. So I would say right now, a lot of safe droning just depends on keeping a safe distance and being really alert as to what birds are doing. And I mean, unfortunately, if you look on YouTube, you can see all kinds of videos of people with questionable judgment flying drones way too close or getting chased up close by an angry gull because they flew too close to a nesting site.
So, I mean, yeah, I wasn't trying to, I believe we should employ all tools we can and responsibly. I'm not, just in general in life, I'm not a person that believes in, banning things. I believe, right now I'm dealing with people who I love and respect that want to ban the use of glyphosate in Philadelphia, and I'm like, well, it's an extremely important tool for land management, and you're gonna. So, I'm all for best practices rather than banning and. So in a democracy, everything's messy. So I hope I don't come off like I was poo-pooing your use of drones. I think it's a phenomenal thing you're doing.
I think we're on the same page, and I think it's a double-edged sword. It's a absolutely vital research tool and can be exceedingly dangerous especially used by. I mean, I try. Frankly, I characterize it as Instagram influencers trying to get that beautiful beach shot when not paying any attention to the angry gulls trying to take the drone down.
So, moving forward with my podcast, I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be released, but we are actually starting a venture called the Wildlife Observation Network. And so it's funny, we started the podcast, I always joke, Billy and I, my partner in the podcast, he came to me and was like, I want to do a podcast about urban wildlife in Philadelphia. And I was like, that is far too narrow. It should be, let's either do urban wildlife worldwide or wildlife in the Philadelphia general region from the mountains to the ocean, because we're an hour from the mountains, an hour from the ocean. And so that's what we did, urban wildlife worldwide. But even though it's wider than our original idea, it's still a very niche topic. And so we have decided that we're going to expand our podcasts to include many different wildlife-related topics, and we're also going to start a YouTube channel. So and this is all should be launched around January 1st. So with that said, if you have any photos that you can share with me,
do we ever?
Oh yeah.
or any video footage, I'd love to have that to accompany, because this one will probably be actually released as well on, YouTube. Sometimes the YouTube is going to be just audio with a picture, but it might, if we can, we have to, we're learning as we go. We might actually, display. So if you could provide any video or photos, it would be fantastic.
Oh, you may have opened the floodgates. We have, but
Probably thousands of photos and many videos of.
And what we have is basically two basically research albums where we documented the colony both years. and we have a bunch of others. We have basically a kind of a curated album that has on, I guess, the prettiest or most relevant pictures that we've used for a couple of slideshows and other things, and we have a few videos as well. Yeah.
We can send you a link.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. So.
Fantastic.
And all the photos are Byron's. He gets all the credit for that.
Well, duly noted. Well, this is fantastic. I hope someday to make my way out there and link up with you and see these colonies.
Come out in the summer and.
Yeah, that'd be great. Although I wonder, I don't know how much traveling I'm going to be doing for a little while.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. We got a wedding coming up in. It's funny. I got to think. I think my declaration that I am expecting was before we recorded. So, by the way, Urban Wildlife Podcast listeners, Tony is expecting a child in the end of June, if all goes well. So my friend's getting married in Montana in August, and we're so excited. And now I'm like, we might have a 6-week-old at that point. So I don't know if any of us can go, let alone her, her and the baby. So we'll have to think about that. So yeah, I hope we're gonna obviously stay in touch, and I hope to get out there in the future. Again, if there's anything else you want to say it now. Otherwise, I think we have a great interview here.
Phoebe wants to weigh in too.
That's a great final word.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
Well, I'm really glad.
Thanks so much for hearing our story.
And thanks for bearing with us.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks for me, because I got, I was as culpable as well. If when we got the news, and my wife's been very sick, and it's been distracting, and it just, I think what you're doing is so cool, and I just wanted to make it happen no matter what. So I'm really glad we did, and it was a real pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Sounds
Absolutely.
great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.